What's up, everybody? Welcome back. You are listening to a very special episode of the Introverted Nerd Watches. I am your black ass host, Reese, and this episode is all about Cloak and Dagger, y'all. See, I promised I was going to do something, and now I'm actually doing it. So a round of applause for me for being consistent, I guess. So if you've been listening to the last few episodes of the podcast, I've been telling you that I'm going to, or if you've been following me on social media, by the way, on social media, on Twitter, I'm at NerdTravertPod. On Instagram, at The Introverted Nerd, and go to the Facebook page and like it. It's at facebook.com/The Introverted Nerd. And you would know all of this stuff. So what I was going to say before I rudely interrupted myself, is that I told you that I was going to add Cloak and Dagger to my podcast schedule, and it starts on June 6th. And what I told you I was going to do was a little comic book primer, sort of a let's get to know Cloak and Dagger. And I've been reading Cloak and Dagger comic books all week to get ready for this. So here I am. And I'm kind of excited about this TV show. I've seen I've seen commercials for it. I've seen some of the previews. There's some like little previews all over like social media and everything. So I've seen those, but I've tried to stay away from everything else because I don't want to be, I don't know. Can you be spoiled for the first episode? I just don't want to. I want to go in like fully surprised about the show, and that seems kind of silly since I've been reading Cloak and Dagger comic books all week, but you know what I'm saying, right? So here's the deal. I forget what I was going to say because I just looked at my screen and something popped up, but okay, so what I wanted to do is sort of go through the history of Cloak and Dagger and to see what part of that history may end up on the show and what is what they should just leave in the past, because they should leave some stuff in the past based on what I read. The more modern stuff, I could get with. The older stuff, so I want to know how they're going to adapt this comic book. I want to know like the things they're going to deal with, because these are a black boy and a white girl. I want to know if they're going to deal with the race on the show. Like, you can't ignore that, can you? You can't ignore race on this show, especially with the way Dagger is treated in the comic book. So I want to know how they're going to handle that. But I remember what I was going to say earlier. There are already reviews up for, I believe it's just the first episode, but it might be the first 2 episodes. I've been trying to stay away because I didn't want to read any of it. But there are reviews up already. So, and I've been like heavily trying to avoid those. But I was talking to someone on Instagram, and they were telling me that they had seen the show at like one of the cons, like Awesome Con or something like that. They went to a con and they saw the first episode already, and they thought it was really good. So fingers crossed that it stays good and that I love it, because I don't know how many episodes are in the first season. I'm assuming that it's like 13 episodes in this first season of the show. So, we'll see if we get a second season, if the rest of the season is any good, and there's even like an IMDb screw up that says it's like 5 out of 10 on IMDb, but you can't trust IMDb because, none of those people have seen the show yet. So it's just a score, and they score it low just to be dicks over there. So screw them, whatever. So Cloak and Dagger make their first appearance in the spectacular Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 64. And they appear a lot with Spider-Man. They're mostly with Spider-Man. They live in New York. They're they have had their own series throughout the years. And I believe this Peter Spectacular Spider-Man number 64, it was in like 1983 or 1984. I forget which year it was. But so I've read that first appearance, and I've read a few more of their appearances in the Spectacular Spider-Man. So I don't know, they have a weird relationship with Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is kind of attracted to Dagger. And okay, so let's go into who Cloak and Dagger are specifically. Cloak is the dude. He is Tyrone Johnson, and Tandy Bowen is Dagger. So yeah, so Spider-Man Peter Parker is really into Dagger when he first meets. Like, he's so into her that she beats his ass. And he's like, he doesn't know what's going on. He's trying to save her or protect her, whatever. And he gets his ass beat like real quick. So he doesn't know what's going on. So it's that's how they show up. They're really vigilantes. So how they got their powers is they were both runaways, and they somehow they got kidnapped by the mafia, and a doctor named, I believe his name Simon Mitchell. I forget the guy's name, but it's a doctor. And they're experimenting on runaways and homeless people on Ellis Island, a new drug called Delight. So they're using these kids to experiment, to try to find a new drug that they can sell on the streets. And everybody else dies from the experimentation except Tandy and Tyrone. And they escape, and the drug they have a reaction to the drug that creates their powers. So Tyrone's powers, Cloak's powers are, his body is a portal to the dark first dimension. His body becomes a portal to the dark first dimension. So his cloak is, I don't even know. It's not his cloak. It's actually his body. So he wears the cloak, to cover like the form, because he loses his bodily form. He can come back to it, but it's like a really difficult thing for him to come back to his bodily form. So he's just, he's it's like a void inside the cloak, and he can teleport. And when he can teleport, and he can teleport other people, but going inside of his cloak is like this really gnarly thing, because what he craves is light. He can't eat regular food, or at least early on in the comics, he can't eat regular food. He survives off of the light force of human souls. I know that's really weird, but that's the case. He sort of fed off of the light of other people, which is why Dagger, he needs her, because she can give her light to him. She can sort of feed him her light so that he doesn't crave other people, because it's just, he gets to a certain point where his hunger for this light is almost insatiable, and he starts killing. He starts like attacking innocent people, guilty people. Like he starts attacking like everybody to try to get this light hunger fulfilled. And so when people go into his darkness, he they experience a sort of like a numbing, like sort of bone chilling coldness. And sometimes they see their worst fears come to life in this in the dark force place that he controls. So he I don't know how much control he has over what they see. I don't think he has any control over what they see, but that's what happens. They see their worst fears, and if they stay in there too long, they actually die. So he was killing they were killing a lot of people early on. Like early in the comics, they were killing just a ton of people. They were on some they were just killing everybody. They get called judge, jury, and executioner by a lot of people. Like Spider-Man is like pissed at them. Spider-Man is like out here trying to defend the drug dealers on the streets from them, because they're just like they swoop in and they're like, we're Cloak and Dagger, and you will not do this on the streets of New York anymore. It's like, it's kind of funny watching them in the early days in New York City, because it's like a cesspool in New York at that time. So his darkness also makes everything seem worse than it actually is. So if you're a bad person, it's like terrible. But if you're a good person, like whatever that means, like relatively good person, you will see it makes everything that you've experienced seem a lot worse. So anything good, it makes being in his dark force makes it seem worse. And I said earlier that he has a physical form, but it's really difficult for him to maintain his physical form. So, that's just the case with him. He has a lot more going on. She is a lot simpler. Dagger generates these daggers made of light. This is all sort of, I don't know, a religious allegory, biblical allegory, I guess, because he literally looks like, when he's in his cloak, he looks like the Grim Reaper. He looks like death. And even earlier in the comic books, his face, when you see his face, it's scary looking. He has this really almost monstrous face in earlier in the comic books. Like later on, it's his face when he's cloaked. He's sort of cloaked in darkness, and you can't see his face. You can only see the shadow. You can only see the shadow under there, and you can see his eyes alight, but you can't see anything else. He's almost, in the earlier comic books, especially in the like earlier in the Spider-Man one, Spectacular Spider-Man, he is almost it's almost animalistic, his face. It looks like he almost looks like a werewolf. He doesn't look like he could be human at all. So that's something that that's something that I definitely don't think will be on the show. People would go out of their fucking minds if they had this black boy looking like an animal on TV, when they can choose to, portray him some other way. So anyway, Dagger generates daggers made of light. She's immune to his darkness, and he feeds off of her light. And she can use her light to shield other people from his darkness. So, and this other crazy thing, her light daggers can cure drug addiction. So here's what happens. Earlier, early, I think it's in their run because okay, so they're in. I forget how many issues they are in of the Spectacular Spider-Man, but they're in a few issues with him. Then they have a 4 issue sort of mini run. Um, and then after that, I believe the year after, after that little 4 issue run, they have a 12 issue run. And I guess the book got canceled. And then they go on to sort of guest star in other people's comics. But during their 12 issue run, I believe that was in 1985, the Cloak and Dagger comic, their solo comic came out. So during that, they they're roaming the streets. So their express purpose is to protect kids like them. So kids that were runaways, kids that are on the streets, protect them from all of the bad shit that was happening in New York at the time, which was mostly drug dealers. There was like pornographers, pimps and shit like that. You see all of that in the comic book. So all that was going on. And so they're trying to protect kids from ending up like them, from being kidnapped and experimented on, or just being sex trafficked, or just anything. They're trying to protect kids like them. So what they end up doing a lot is sort of just roaming around the streets, and they see something going on, mostly drug dealers and shit like that, or pimps and prostitution. And so they try to stop them. Dagger throws her daggers, and she throws them into Cloak's darkness, and then they spit the person out at the end, and the person is changed from mostly being inside of his cloak. Whatever they experience in the dark forest, it sort of paralyzes them. So they just sort of laid out on the ground, or they kill them. So what happened in this one issue is that they see a pimp and a prostitute, and I'm using that language specifically because they use that in the book. But a pimp and a prostitute is like begging for drugs, and she won't leave her pimp, and he starts smacking her because he doesn't have any drugs for her. It's a whole thing. It's so crazy. But they swoop in, and they're like, we're Cloak and Dagger. They do that a lot. They swoop in, and Dagger is standing in front of Cloak, his cloak is all like fanned out, like like it's the opening of the curtains for a show or something. They're all fanned out, and she's standing in front of him in a pose because she used to be a dancer. So it's almost, she's doing all these yoga poses all the time. So she's like all splayed out in front of him, and they're like, we're Cloak and Dagger. And it cracked me up. It's very funny to me. But so they see this pimp and the prostitute, and he engulfs him in his cloak. And what Dagger does is the prostitute starts attacking them because she wants drugs. It's very over the top with the whole drug usage thing. The idea they had of like people that were like on drugs or using drugs is just so like antiquated. It's so funny to watch, to read. I mean, the way they used to think about people that were on drugs. It was like you couldn't just use drugs. Everybody was addicted to drugs, like so addicted, running around, attacking grandmas and just doing all types of shit for just, they never talk about what kind of drugs people are using, but everything is a hardcore drug in these early books. So, Dagger throws her light daggers at the prostitute, and she falls out, and then she gets back up, and it's like, oh my goodness, I no longer want the drugs. I want to leave, everything is better. So she cures someone of their addiction to drugs. Oh my God. Oh my God. It is ridiculous, but kind of great, and I kind of love it. So um so they end up through the years being members, since they don't have their own comic book again after that run, after that 12 issue run. They never get their own comic book again. They have they have a one shot in 2010, and then they have a, what is it, a 3-issue run of Spider-Man Spider Island. So they get their own 3 issues of Spider Island, and that's it for like the shit that's like solo for them. But they wound up on a lot of teams. So they were part of the Marvel Knights. They were members of the Dark X-Men. And that's from the whole time. I forget who made the X-Men Dark and the Dark Avengers and all that shit. They were in Utopia. They're in quite a few teams. They were in the Secret Avengers. But they left the X-Men because they're not mutants. They're mutates, and they got their powers from the drugs that were used to experiment on them. So they're really upset. And specifically, Tandy is very upset when she finds out that she's not actually a mutant. They thought that the drug might have brought out their mutant powers and all that, blah, blah, blah. The X-Men shit is like really complicated, and there's a lot of it going on, and I don't want to get into too much X-Men stuff because I'll be here for another hour and a half just trying to sort out how the X-Men became the Dark X-Men, and there were Dark Avengers, and yeah, whole long history. Go to Marvel Unlimited. First of all, get Marvel Unlimited. It's so worth it. And then you go back and read all of the Cloak and Dagger stuff and all of the X-Men stuff that has to do with when they became the Dark X-Men. It was Norman Osborn this is the whole thing. This is a whole thing. Norman Osborn created the Dark Avengers and the Dark X-Men, and it's a whole thing. So they end up leaving the X-Men. They sort of have a falling out because she's trying to make it work after they figure out that they were being used by Norman Osborn. They try to make it work. They're living on Utopia, which is the X-Men island where all of the mutants used to live. They were living in Utopia. Tyrone wasn't into it, Cloak wasn't into it, but Tandy was, and she was just trying to make it work. And they have this weird relationship where they're together like they're married, but it's never really a sexual relationship, at least not in all the stuff that I read. I read their solo book. I read their Spider-Man stuff, and I read their solo stuff. I didn't really read the X-Men stuff. So, and I read they were in, the last one I read was the, Secret Empire. They're in Secret Empire. They appear in Secret Empire, but they're, so they have like this really weird relationship that's not, I can't even tell you whether they're really together. Like he gets really jealous a lot. They have this. Okay, so early on, it felt like they had almost an abusive relationship. Nobody was they were treating it like it was an abusive relationship, but it was this to save this girl. everything became about saving the white girl. That's sort of how I saw it. Everybody saw this pretty little white girl. So everything became about saving her and sort of making him like the monster. Um, and so all the men that come around want to save her. Peter Parker, they meet a priest, a Catholic priest named Father Francis Delgado, and his whole mission is to save her. Now, they're supposed to be the same age. They're both teenagers. They don't look like teenagers, especially when they're in costume. Dagger's costume. So Dagger's costume, she's wearing this white bodysuit that has the cutout of a dagger in the middle, which means that there is a lot of comics with this 16-year-old girl's titties basically hanging out. And I get it. That's just comic books, especially back then. But when I first started reading this, I had no idea that they were supposed to be teenagers. Because I didn't know that much about Cloak and Dagger. I just saw the preview on TV and I got interested and I found out there was a comic, so I was like, "Oh, I'll just read the comics." But when I first saw it, I had no idea they were meant to be teenagers. Because Spider-Man, during the Spectacular Spider-Man, he is in college. And when he meets them, he looks at them and he starts calling them kids. And I'm like, "Peter, what are you doing? Like, why are you acting like you're old? Like, stop calling these people kids. They are not children." Turns out I was wrong, and they are children. They're 16 years old. So, but her uniform is just so wild. So they have to do something. They have to do something about that costume. In all the previews that I've seen, they don't have either one of them in costume. Now, maybe I missed something, I'm not sure, but neither one of them are in costume. So it's, it could always be the case that they never get those costumes, but they're called Cloak and Dagger. So he has to be wearing that cloak. She doesn't have to wear that white costume to be Dagger, but, he has to wear a cloak, right? It's not Cloak and Dagger unless they're wearing the cloak and you see the daggers, right? But she has this, her boobs are basically hanging out. So, and it's really weird because they're so young, but they don't look it at all. So, they have religious ties. So they end up living in the church. I told you about Father Delgado. They go to his church for help. And they end up living there for a long time. And Spider Island is when they end up moving out because the church is being demolished. But they and so I wonder how much they're going to deal with that in the show, because it's not really subtext. It's right in front of you. And in the book, Father Delgado literally calls Cloak a demon, and he calls Dagger the angel of light. So, I'm an atheist. So, so that we're clear. And let me just say that the religious stuff is not like over the top to me. It's not constantly preaching. But when you have a dude that looks like the Grim Reaper and you're calling him the devil and a demon and all that, it's hard to overlook all that stuff. Now, this is on, I was about to call it ABC Family, but what's it called again? Freeform. This is going to be on Freeform. It's a Disney, channel type thing. So I don't know. Do they get super religious on the Disney Channel or anything like that? I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've seen since I've seen anything on Freeform. I stopped watching The Fosters a long time ago, so I'm not sure. But I doubt they're going to get any. They're going to get super religious, so that's something I don't really have to worry about. But and even her dagger, the way it's set, it looks like a cross across her chest, and she has dagger earrings and everything. It's a whole thing. So as far as their relationship goes, I want to get deeper into that because he early on in the comics, he is very jealous. Cloak is, and I keep calling them, they don't call each other by their names a whole lot, especially early on. They refer to themselves as Cloak and Dagger all the time. So, it's going to take me a while to get into calling them by their actual names. So he's very controlling. Like I said, it almost felt emotionally abusive to me. He never listened to her. It was always like she was always telling him that she wanted to be normal. She wanted to do normal things. She didn't want to be out there killing people all the time. Getting this vengeance back for them. And it was that's why they seemed older to me, or whether that's why he seemed older to me. He seemed really like older. He had almost like this it felt like this sort of Svengali like effect on her, like she couldn't get away from him. He needs her. He needs to feed off of her light. So she can't leave him. And even when she tried to leave him at one point. She tried to go back to her parents, and he sort of manipulated the situation so that she was forced to come back to him because she had nowhere else to go. So he is very needy. I hope they don't do that in the show. I hope they treat them more like equals. I hope they have a more reciprocal relationship is what I'm hoping. Because I was really hoping she would get away from him at certain points during this comics, because it was just bad. I didn't even want to continue reading because I was like, oh my God, get this girl away from him. And not like the men in the book, because the men in the book were nobody ever listened to her. It was all these men wanted to protect her, but nobody was actually listening to anything she was saying. So it ended up with Dagger in the middle, with all of these men sort of fighting around her to save her soul from Cloak. And he talks a lot about loving her, but he just, it's so needy. I can't, that's the only word for it. It is so very, very needy. He needs her. And what makes it worse, what makes his love worse is that he literally needs her to not be consumed by this darkness. He needs her light, literally, like needs her to touch him, to, be there with him, to infuse him with her light, so that, he sort of becomes her responsibility, because if he can't get her light, he starts consuming the light in the other people around. So she is basically protecting the public from him. And so currently in the comics, they are, I believe, in Hong Kong, because they went during Spider Island, their powers were switched and they turned evil, and it was a whole thing. But now their powers are back to normal, but they're in Hong Kong protecting the people of Hong Kong now. So, you know, and in Secret Empire, there was a whole thing where they cloak New York in the dark dimension because of, see, you got to read Secret Empire. I'm not getting into all of Secret Empire, but they cloaked New York, ends up cloaked in the dark dimension, and they use her to light the place, because if she can't light the place, then it's everybody would die. So they need her to light the place, and she's being drained of her light and all that, blah blah blah. And that's sort of the end of them in the comic books. I mean, they become heroes for hire for a while because they don't have any money. She tries to get Cloak to go to the Avengers, to try to join the Avengers so that they have some place to live, but they don't. He doesn't want to do that because, he has a whole thing. He doesn't want to join teams anymore after what happened with the X-Men. So they got a lot going on. Now that's all later stuff. What we're going to be dealing with in the show, where they're still teenagers, is, the teenager stuff, the running away from home. Her mom is, she was a little rich girl whose mom didn't pay any attention to her. So she has, parental issues. I forget why he ran away, but, he ran away because he had things going on. He's from Boston. He had things going on with his family. So he runs away too. And they both end up in New York together. Now, I wonder if they're going to let this show take place in New York, because I know they can't film in New York. This show probably films in like Toronto or Vancouver or something like that. So, I don't know. I wonder if they're going to do the whole they have to do the drug experimentation thing so that they get their powers. But I wonder if it's going to be the way that it was in the comic book, because, New York was so different back then. Not that you can't be kidnapped, and experimented on, in modern day, but it's just... the New York of that time was just way different than it is now. So I do wonder how they're going to do that. I wonder how they're going to do their relationship, because, that's the most important thing, the relationship that they have with each other. Because they turn into sort of this codependent mess. They can't be away from each other. They do have like a little like tiff in the X-Men, when they leave the X-Men, but that's handled in that one issue of Cloak and Dagger, their one shot in 2010. They handled the sort of breakup and makeup that they have. So there's not a whole lot going on. It's really hard to talk about them because they're all over other people's comics. They were in the Runaways for a while. They get, hired to find the kids from the Runaways. Ooh, I wonder if they could actually ever appear on the Runaways, because they have a Runaways show on Hulu right now. I do wonder if Cloak and Dagger I wonder if they would ever do that, though. Probably not. Probably no crossovers, but that would be really cool, I think, for them to cross over. I mean, they were only in, I believe, 2 issues of the Runaways comic, but I do wonder if they could ever cross over. Be kind of cool though to see them. I mean, did anybody watch the Runaways besides me? I didn't hear a whole lot of talk about the Runaways. I live tweeted it back in, that was probably earlier in the year, like January, February, something like that. So not a whole lot of talk about the Runaways right now. And I didn't hear anybody talking about it then. I enjoyed that show. It's really crazy. It's a kid's show, mostly. So maybe it'll be like on par with Cloak and Dagger since they're also going to be teenagers. Um I know they're going to update their dialogue, but the dialogue they have in the comic is just so I kind of love how they're very dramatic, how over the top and dramatic, and they use very flowery language. That's another reason why I didn't think that they were only teenagers, because like this one panel in the comics, they see an assault on the street, and here's the whole thing. Did you witness that assault, Cloak? Yes, Dagger. Those two perpetrated it. Now seek those two who perpetrated it now seek shelter. Let's go. And it's like, it's very like over the top. Like this is not how two human beings speak to each other. But I kind of love how over the top and dramatic it is. It's kind of great that way. So that is your history of Cloak and Dagger. I hope you like it. There's a lot going on with them. It's all in other people's stuff though. And I think you have like you can do a whole lot with them because of the fact that they didn't have their own comic book. So you can sort of take from a lot of other places. The fact that they cross paths with so many other characters gives you it gives you sort of a big canvas to work with. So when the show comes on, I hope we get to see an updated version of the stuff that I liked from the comic book, which is their powers are really cool. I think you're going to end up with a lot of angst and I think this could end up kind of soap opera-ish because, and that's sort of my thing because, I don't watch soaps anymore, but, I'm a girl that can get into some shipping. So if the two characters like mesh and I can get into like shipping them, it's all good. So, until Thursday, June 6th, we'll see what happens. I'm excited about it. I'll be live tweeting the show that night. I believe does it come on at 8:00 or 9:00? I forget. I should probably know this, but whatever. It's a holiday. It's a holiday weekend. I'm not doing that much work. So it comes on Thursday, June 6th. I'm going to be live tweeting it. And so follow me on Twitter at NerdTrovertPod. You can follow my personal account on Twitter at the Ms. Introvert. You can follow me on Instagram at the Introverted Nerd. And like the Facebook page at facebook.com/the Introverted Nerd. And if you want to shoot me an email, send it to theintrovertednerd@gmail.com. So what was I going to say? Oh, so there's no Fear the Walking Dead this week. So you'll be getting this episode on Tuesday because since there was no Fear the Walking Dead, you'll get this episode instead. What else? Saved by the Bell will still be out on Thursday. I'm watching season 4, episode 9. I forget what number it is, but it's the episode. It's called Fake IDs. That's the episode of Saved by the Bell that I watched this week. So you'll be getting that episode on Thursday, like regular. Fear the Walking Dead will be back next week, so I can't wait to see that show because there's some wild shit going on. And if you want to listen to back episodes of the show, subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts. or Google Play, Stitcher, anywhere you get your podcast, or you can go to the website, theintrovertednerd.com, and you can listen to all of the back episodes there. All the Saved by the Bell episodes from the beginning. And I reviewed the whole season of Black Lightning, so you can go get those episodes there as well. So that's it, you guys. Later.